Hello and welcome to Portal Behind the Scenes. This is where we take you beyond the pages of the journal to learn more about the research from our authors and insights from our editors to let you know what's happening with Portal. I'm your co-host and Portal social editor, Stephen Bell. I'm at Temple University Libraries. And with me today is my fellow Portal editor, Elisa Cahoy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elisa, and I am an education librarian and assistant director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book at Penn State University. Thanks, Stephen.
You're welcome. Now, in today's episode of Portal Behind the Scenes, we're talking with Mark Lenker, who is the teaching and learning librarian at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Mark happens to be the author of the article, Developmentalism, Learning as the Basis for Evaluating Information, which is certainly a hot topic right now. Now, Mark's article received the Portal Award for the best article in Portal for the 2017 volume year. And we really appreciate having Mark join us today to tell us about the research and the ideas behind his article. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for being our guest today. And we thought a good starting point would be to have you tell us about developmentalism. How does it relate to information literacy? And what brought you to the exploration of this topic?
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to talk about my work, and I'm excited that I got to publish in Portal. It's been a really good experience. With respect to your question, I'll take the last part first and talk about how I got into this. And some of our viewers may be able to relate. It all started with frustration with my own teaching. About 8 or 9 years ago, when I was working as a reference and instruction librarian at Longwood University, which was a great place for me. But it occurred to me that I wasn't doing a very good job in teaching my students about the evaluation of information. I tended to put it off until the very last part of my one-shot classes. And at that point, I'd go over a handout that had kind of a checklist for avoiding unreliable information. I'd ask the students if they had any questions. It was the end of class, so they never had any questions, and we'd call it a day, and that was it. But over time, I realized that I was shortchanging one of the most challenging and subtle aspects of research. The question is, out of all the information sources that are available to me, what are my reasons for working with this one? That's the question that's at the heart of evaluating information. And I wasn't doing a great job helping my students wrestle with that question. So I stepped back and thought about what I was trying to accomplish with my teaching. And when you look at the word evaluation, just the roots, you see there's a matter of determining the value of something. What is it that makes this thing good? I enjoy philosophy, so I thought that maybe I could find some direction looking at philosophical theories of value. I don't think that's usually what normal people think about their teaching, but it happened to me, and so I went with it. And yeah, around the time I was mulling all this over, I was walking past the new bookshelves in my library, and a title caught my eye. It was by Richard Kraut, who's a philosopher that I knew from his work on Plato and Aristotle. And the title was just perfect for someone in my situation. The name of the book was What is Good and Why? I mean, if I can figure that out, so many questions I could answer, and I could certainly answer, get some direction on my big question about teaching. What is it that makes information good?
Yeah. So there was a bit of serendipity here.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, kind of a fun little library story there. Gotta love the new bookshelves. But to get to the other part of your question, so Kraut argues for an understanding of goodness that's based on growth and development. viewers who are maybe familiar with Aristotle's idea of flourishing as central to the good life, you'll see the influence here. In the case of humans, for Kraut, what is good is what helps us develop our cognitive, affective, sensory, social, and physical capacities. Anything that helps us develop in those important ways. And following Kraut, I argue that good information helps us develop our cognitive, affective, and social capacities. I feel like that emphasis on growth is a really good fit for working in an educational context like ours. And in the paper, I sketch out what it would look like if developmentalism informed our practice of teaching around the evaluation of information.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mark, you know, I love that focus on sort of the, you know, that goodness and the development of, you know, the whole person. And part of this in your article, you talk about disruptive information. And how does that relate to this process of learning and developmentalism?
Great. So yeah, in the paper, I argue that information is at its best when it has a disruptive quality, when it knocks us out of our established patterns of thinking and feeling and calls on us to grow, to accommodate a new perspective. Information that challenges us helps us flourish in a way that, you know, information that basically confirms the way we thought before doesn't. Disruptive information is an occasion for development, in other words. And if I look back on the time period when I was writing this, I was just coming off another research project where I was looking at motivated reasoning and confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is our tendency to gravitate toward information that confirms our existing thoughts and feelings. And I think that probably played a big part in how I envisioned my ideal for learning from information. I wanted something that was the 180-degree opposite of confirmation bias. So yeah, the best information unsettles us, and that works out to be an occasion for growth.
That's awesome. And it's also that affective piece of making yourself uncomfortable in the learning process in order for that learning to happen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, sure thing.
Mark, when you read the article, you get the sense that developmentalism and the approach you're sharing with a reader is a very radical departure from the traditional things that we do in the classroom, which is often the checklist approach, or even the triangulation approach, or we're now being advised to help students become fact checkers. So a question that people would naturally have for you is, have you tried to actually implement the developmentalism methods or approach into your own instruction? What can people expect if they try to do this?
Great. Yes. So in the paper, I talk about the developmentalist approach as one that should complement what you're doing in terms of questioning a source's trustworthiness, and complements what you're doing in terms of evaluating a source in terms of how you can use it. In the paper, I point out some of the limitations of the other approaches, but I think at its best, they're all going to work together. Mm-hmm. And in terms of how it's influenced my own work, in the paper, I single out first-year English composition as an important point in our students' college careers, where we get to influence them about what makes information worthwhile. And at UNLV, I work with a really talented team of colleagues, and together we develop lesson plans for first-year English. And my colleagues have been able to, or have been gracious enough to incorporate some questions about learning with information to get the students to reflect on their experience as we're doing these exercises in the classroom, or reflective work outside of class too. And our one-shot classes for first-year English are timed so that they come right when the students are starting to think about the annotated bibliographies that they're going to do that build into their big research paper, their argument paper. And so it works out as a natural time to get students to think about, okay, so how am I going to justify the sources that I've chosen when I'm writing this annotation in this phase of my project? A lot of times in classes like that, I will talk about the cherry picking strategy of doing research, where a researcher can start a project with a thesis that they want to defend and then just find information that confirms that.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to explain the annotation as an opportunity for the student to explain to the instructor that they're doing more than that, right? If the annotation talks a little bit about how the information changes the way they've looked at their research question, that demonstrates that actual learning is taking place. And that's what everybody wants out of these research
Mm-hmm.
projects that we ask our students to do. So there's some opportunity there, I think. And when I talk about things like that, kind of a nice surprise has been that that's when instructors will like start nodding their heads vigorously or kind of jump in to connect what we're talking about in the lesson with previous discussions of confirmation bias or the importance of, working with a genuine research question. And that's been great. It's been a nice reminder that the composition instructors are usually really great champions of information literacy as well, even
Mm-hmm.
if they're coming at it from a different sort of background than the librarian has. So yeah, it's been a nice opportunity to work with our collaborators in that way.
So for readers of the article, they don't necessarily have to feel like they need to abandon what they're doing now to make this radical change, but more amplify what they're doing in the classroom with existing methods so that they're asking these questions to get students thinking more deeply about choices they're making and then questioning their own confirmation bias.
Right,
Okay.
right. This learning-centered approach, it's kind of a matter of me trying to identify what it is that we've been leaving out. And so, yeah, you can build upon your trust-based approaches and use-based approaches, but yeah, reminding everyone that it's all about how much you learn is key here, I think.
Good advice. All right, thanks.
Yeah.
And so building off that, Mark, what would you recommend as a starting point for librarians who want to implement or, try adding in some aspects of a developmentalism approach for evaluating information in their own instruction?
Sure. For library instruction, I would encourage teaching librarians to work with their collaborating faculty in the departments on assignment design. And I think the most important point of leverage is probably the annotated bibliography assignment. I'd argue for questions that ask students to compare sources with one another, but also compare the information with their original perspective on the research question. And I've pulled out some questions that I think might be really good here. What source surprised you the most and why? What source was most convincing? What makes you say that? And then was the most convincing source also the most surprising source? Why or why not? I think if you start asking questions like that, it drives home the idea that the important thing isn't just the inherent characteristics of the source. It's not just that the author has a PhD or was published by Oxford University Press, but just as important are like the quality and the degree of change that the source brings about in the student and their way of thinking about their research question.
It's interesting because it gets back to the beginning of what you were talking about with that discomfort with kind of just tagging on source evaluation at the end of class. And instead, you've come to this place of reflective questions to help guide them through that process.
Right. Yeah. And questions are important, and reflecting on the way you talk about research is important as well. An important article for me, also from Portal, was written by Wendy Holliday and Jim Rogers. And they show that when teachers talk about research in terms of learning more about and get away from just finding sources, it has a real influence on the tone of the class, and it changes the way that students think about research. And I think I'm trying to accomplish something similar here.
That's awesome. Well, that is a great note to end on. And Mark, on behalf of myself and Stephen and the Portal editorial board, we want to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on your award-winning article with us today. This was a fascinating conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited.
Thanks again, Mark.
Yep.
Great
And
having you join us.
to our viewers, we want to say thanks for taking part in Portal, Behind the Scenes. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Portal Journal for links to future episodes and other journal news. So thanks again, Mark. And until next time, we'll see you soon.